guys, Jason here, welcome back. Well, today we're looking at a Ceriatone Overdrive Special. It's the Dumble clone, and it's the first one that I've had really time with, right? And maybe even the first one I've played through, to be fair. I've certainly never played through a Dumble, and I think this is the first Ceriatone Overdrive Special Dumble clone that I've had some time to play with. Look, these things are really interesting amps, right? And that's no surprise to anyone. I would suspect, like, the clean channel is pretty magical, but I've spent time trying to get to grips with the overdrive channel because it's not an easy thing to bond with, if I'm honest, right? Not coming from kind of my perspective, you know, being kind of a Marshall guy, coming from a Marshall lens, more of a kind of high gain, you know, that we all know what I'm talking about, I guess, right? However, I've always been a huge Robin Ford fan, and I love his tone. He's an amazing player, and just an incredible musician, I think. And this amp is actually modeled after his Dumble amp, right? Because as I understand it, with the research that I've done, Alexander Dumble would build amps for each artist, right? So there's no kind of standard model. Obviously there's a standard formula, but each amp would be tweaked. This amp actually came in for me to look at because the C-Lator, as Nick at Ceriatone calls it, or the Dumbulator, right, as it was in the original Dumble amp, was not working. So what is a Dumbulator? Well, it's an effects loop, right? It's a buffered effects loop. These amps only had an interrupt effects loop. And when I say interrupt, what I mean is that basically after the master volume of the amp and the phase inverter input, there'd just be a send and return. It's not buffered, right? So it kind of works okay if you've got very short cable runs and you're running into, let's say, a rack effects unit that can handle a very hot signal. What you actually need, really, so that you can kind of handle, all kinds of different effects in your effects loop, including pedals, and particularly pedals that you might want to run out to the front of your board, reverbs, delays, and so on, and an effects loop. Long cable runs out to your pedal board, a long cable run back again. You need a buffered loop. We all know this, right? Well, how do you get a buffered loop? Well, you've got to change your high impedance signal to low impedance, and the way you normally do that with a tube buffered loop is to use a cathode follower arrangement. That's what these have. The Dumbulator, or the C-Lator, which is Nick's version of it, right, is a single 12 AX7 tube inside these things. It's got two triodes, right? The first triode is a cathode follower which buffers the signal out to low impedance, allows you to run it out, long cable runs, all kinds of effects, right? Bring it back in, and it's got some nice controls on it, right? It's got a drive control and in and out, bright switches, so you can use the effects loop, the external effects loop in this thing to further tweak your tone. So in this clip, we're going to do some bit more tone exploring, right? So I'm going to play a little bit. We'll explore things on the neck pickup here and on the bridge pickup. This is a 335. It's I don't play it enough. I need more time. I want to play it more. It's an early 90s model, and I bought it second hand. It's got stock pickups in it, and it had a problem with the truss rod, actually, which only developed over time. And thankfully, Joseph Price, who's an amazing luthier who just lives a suburb away from me here in Melbourne, Australia. Well, Joseph brought this guitar back to life, and he fixed what was a pretty horrific problem with the truss rod here. Joseph is an amazing guitar technician, right? So if you need a simple setup all the way through to the most complex of guitar repairs, refrets, the whole 9 yards. Joseph is your guy. If you live in Australia, I recommend you checking him out. So let's get into some tones. So this amp came in because the external effects loop, the dumbulator if you like, has stopped working, right, completely, just gone. And I tested it, and sure enough, right, if you patched in the external dumbulator, no sound, nothing going on, right? So when we take it out to the bench, what we're going to do is obviously look to diagnose that problem, see if we can resolve it. At the same time, because I'm pulling the chassis out of the head cap, we'll have a good look at the core amp itself and just have a look at the bill, and I will just do some rudimentary checks, right, in terms of the bias and so on. Let's get into it. All right, guys, here is our 50 watt Overtone Special. So the issue with this amp is only with the dumbulator. Well, you know, as it was called in the original, this is called a C-Lator, Ceriatone, right, which is the buffered effects loop. So if I just turn this around, and hopefully this comes out on the video, right? So these have interrupt effects loop. It's not buffered, right? So it's not, these don't convert signal into a low impedance signal which is suitable to be sent out over a long cable length, right? So you could use this loop as is only if you're running very short cable length and into a device that could handle a pretty hot signal in terms of amplitude. Okay, so they're not that friendly. The C-Lator, or the dumbulator, is set up to provide a buffered effects loop separately, right? So the way that Nick does these, pretty cool, because this is mounted into the cab like this, completely standalone separate device, and you can see it has its own power supply. So what you do is you run 1/4 inch jack patch cables, right, from send to in, and then from out back to return, and then you send and return here is now a proper buffered signal by this guy. This is where the fault is in this amp. So when you patch this in, no signal comes out. All right, so I'm going to pull this apart and obviously diagnose and fix this. But while we're at it, I'll pull the main amp out of the cab as well, and we'll have a bit of a look at it. All right, so I've obviously got the lid off this thing. You can see a single 12AX7 here. Right, so as we know, right, 2 triodes in one of these. So one side is used as a cathode follower to drop the signal, the input signal, to a low impedance signal suitable to send out and ascend. And then the other side of the triode, or other side of the 12AX7, I should say, the other triode is used as the recovery stage. So when the signal comes back in the return, it gets recovered up. There's 3 pots on the front here, a drive, an in and an out. I've just had a quick look at the layout that Nick provides on his website, and I can see that the drive is setting the send level on the output here, right? So the input, your guitar input, coming from the amp, right, doesn't actually go through these pots. It's coupled through this coupling cap here. It comes straight in on the grid of this triode on this side, which is set up as a cathode follower. So the plate of the triode is tied directly to the B plus line. There's no plate resistor because it's a cathode follower, right? So there's a resistor, or a couple of resistors on the cathode. Is set up as a split cathode, actually, which is all cool, pretty normal for an effects loop. And then that output signal goes through this drive pot. Okay, so the drive is allows you to set how hot the send level is out of this loop. So when your guitar signal comes back in through the return here from out of the your outboard gear, you can use the input pot to adjust how hot it is on re-entry into this recovery stage, right, which is the second triode, which is set up in a more traditional way with a plate resistor and a small cathode resistor tied to ground. Then it's obviously the signal is re-amplified and recovered, and it's the output pot here that allows you to adjust finally how much signal is coming here before it returns to the amp. So let's power this thing on and see if we can locate where this issue is, right? At the moment, as I said, completely dead. Nothing comes out of this thing. So power it up here. I've got it attached to my variac, which just means I can just bring it up gently, I guess, and make sure I can just supply it with bang on 240. I've got my meter here just tied to ground on the chassis there, and let me move this into a DC voltage. So I'm just going to go straight into measuring the plate voltage on this triode, which will be pin 1. 380, that's really high, super high. If I go to the cathode on the same triode, it's 0. Okay, so what does that tell us? 0 volts on the cathode, but I've got a massively high voltage on the plate. Well, I know immediately that tells me that this tube is not conducting. Right? There's no current flow through that triode at all, because otherwise we would have a voltage on that cathode, because it'd be current flowing through it, right? It's current flowing through the resistance. It's going to develop a voltage. Now, if I go to the other triode, find the plate, also very high. Now, on this side, on this triode, we've actually got a plate load resistor, right? So if the B plus on here is, I'm going to call it 376, because that's what remember on the cathode follower side, that's tied directly to the B+. So it's, you know, 377, 376. On this side, it goes through a plate load resistor, but it's the same reading. Also tells me there is no current flowing on this triode. So I'm going to look straight away and see if I can see if the filaments are glowing. Nope, nothing. So let me just check the AC voltage on the filament supply. This is coming in here, right? So this transformer here is providing heater current for this tube, and also it's got a few taps on it. It'll be creating the high voltage secondary, which is, you know, developing the B+ voltage here, which, as we've already measured, is about 375, 376. Let me just check one of these. 3.3, okay, that's good, right? Half of 6.5, give or take, and there it is there as well. So this could be as simple as it did 12AX7. I'm going to throw a new one in there, see what we get. Well, I've replaced this preamp tube, right? I've actually tried two different ones. Neither of them have their filaments glowing, so it's not the tube. So I've started to you know, trace this just using my meter, right? And just for connectivity, there's yellow and green wires here off this transformer. This is the filament supply, the heater supply, right? So at 240 volts in, I'm getting 6.5 volts AC across here. It's all good. Comes on to this PCB at this point, and then correspondingly comes off the other side, comes across here. So this yellow one is feeding pins 4 and 5, which are bridged together, and the green is pin 9, which is exactly what we'd expect. Now, I'm going to trace the yellow one, right? So here's our yellow supply, and right, so both pins 4 and 5 are obviously getting, and I can obviously touch the socket itself. Now if I go to green, right, that's the green wire. There it is on this side, and here it is on the other. If I go to pin 9, I got nothing. All right, here's pin 9. All right, so I've got connectivity there. Go to the green, nothing. So to narrow this down, it's either bad solder joint here, dry joints cracked, I'm not getting any connectivity. Can't be this tube socket, because I just tested you know, where the pin goes in, and the leg it's not broken, right? There's a connection there. So crank the iron up, we'll reflow solder on this the green heater wire, see how we go. Okay, might be as simple as that. I've now got a connection to pin 9, the original tube. Here it is. It's a tube amp doctor, a TAD 7025. Okay, it looks nice and new. Let's put it in, and let's power this guy up. The power is off at the moment. All I'm going to be looking for initially is that we have filament current. So I'll turn this light off. The video will probably adjust, but for my eyes, at least it gives me an opportunity to see. I'm just bringing the voltage up here on the Variac, about 180 at the moment. Oh yeah, I can see a glow. So I'm bringing the Variac up to 240. And there we are, bang on 240. And I can see the wonderful glow of a 12AX7. I don't know if that's coming out on camera, guys, but it's there. You can see. So while we're here, let's measure some voltages, right? So remember, we had no filaments, no heaters, no current flowing, no voltage drop. So I'm on DC. I have got my ground is grounded, and let's go to pin 1, 247. Now remember, it was 376, right? Give or take. 246. Let's go to the cathode. 24 volts. All right, happy days. We've got voltage. We've got current flow at idle here, obviously. This is the plate on the second triode, which was, remember, also measuring 376 because there was no current flow through the plate load resistor. Now 220, which is what you'd expect, and the cathode of this triode, 1.3 volts. This is a conventional setup, right, with a plate resistor and a small cathode resistor, just like you would see in a regular preamp gain stage. And remember, the first one is cathode, set up as a cathode follower. So this guy here is tied directly to the B plus supply, and you can see the B plus has come down, right? Because we're now getting a nice nice current draw through this guy. All right, well, I reckon that's it. I will test this with the scope, and because I just want to make sure that we are getting signal through it, although there's a 100% chance that that dry joint was the cause of this issue. So I fired up the scope and ran a test signal through our C-Lator, the dumbulator, and she's all good. All right, so nice signal getting pushed out through the send. Ran the signal back through the return and measured the output, and it's all goodness there, right? So before we put this all back together again, take the opportunity to have a look at this amp, right? This Overdrive Special. So tidy, this is all hand done, right? All hand wired. An eyelet board here. It's got obviously our orange drops here, but the workmanship in terms of the build quality of these things, quite surreal, right? All Teflon wiring, right? This is all heat resistant wiring here. Plenty of stuff mounted on the sidewalls here. This is the FET boost board here. I think this board here is setting up the supply line for the relays, I believe. Yeah, 5 volt, 0 and 5 volts. So 5 volt AC line coming in here. That's setting up for a DC supply voltage that can be used for the relay switching and the flip switch. Turn your attention to the wiring here across the tube sockets. Now, have a look at that heater wiring. Is it elevated heaters? Man, that is just so cool. So tidy. I love it. Look at the way that the clamps here on the cable ties, I should say, are used. Really cool. Nick has his bias adjustment pot here. Right, the amp's on, powered up. We're at 240 volts at the wall,
Using my variac here to get it just absolutely bang on. There we go, 240. So let's measure the plate voltage meter. It's in DC. Got the ground on the chassis. Pin 3. Got 451. Expect exactly the same on this side, of course. Let's call it 451, and I'm going to put that into my bias calculator, which is an app that I use on my Android phone. Tube bias calculator. Interestingly, I couldn't find one of these on that the Apple store, whatever you call it, App Store. But on Android, we're all happy there. So that what this is telling me is 29 milliamps is 70% plate dissipation, right? Which is kind of the safe maximum. I always like to go a little bit under that. So if I punch in 27, maybe 28. 28 is going to give me 66% plate dissipation. So, you know, we're kind of 28, 29 in that ballpark, right? So let's measure. NEC has conveniently included these bias probe points, which I can obviously use from this side of the chassis as well. 29. Look at that. These guys know what they're doing. 33. A little bit high on that side. I think I'll just leave it. I think I'll just leave it as is. So that's it for today's video, guys. These dumble lamps, you know, I can kind of understand what it's all about, having kind of played through this thing for a couple of days now. It's really rewarding. It's quite easy to play. It's kind of that funny thing where it's not high gain, so it's not, you know, like a high gain amp will be quite forgiving in many ways, right? This thing is not like that, but it's easier to play than mini amps. Like if you think of a JCM 800 that's kind of just on edge of breakup or whatever, and you've got to really kind of fight, or a Plexi, you've got to fight with it a bit. This thing's not like that. It's very smooth. It's really nice for lead playing, and it's got just amazing sustain, even though it doesn't feel like doesn't have that real kind of high gain kind of sound, right? So it's sustain, but still at low gain levels, and it's very, very fat. You know, it's just got this big bottom end that's kind of just sitting there, and it's a lot of fun to play. I'm really bonding with it, right? So that's it for today's video, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, then please do, and ring the bell, and you'll be notified of new content. Catch you guys.